All right, I am excited to welcome to the Steam Zone Mr. David Rothzeid, investor at Shield Capital, Mr. Zach Beecher, investor at Scout Ventures, Scout VC, and this becomes, maybe our most diverse segment yet, gentlemen, in that we now have the Marines, the Air Force, and the Army all represented on this segment, which leaves the Navy and the Coast Guard as the odd men out. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Excited for this conversation. David and Zach have an article out this week focused on everybody's favorite punching bag program, the Small Business Innovation Research, or SBIR program. Despite being a tad bit controversial, it is also the front door, the entryway, the first port of call for, I would argue, just about every defense tech startup in the ecosystem. And yet right now it is taking some flack. The INNOVATE Act, the SBIR Reauthorization Act, which is typically something of a rubber stamp, it's catching some flack this year. Guys, what is the argument? Why should we be reauthorizing SBIR right now?
Well, thanks, Noah. I'm a first time but long time on the Steam Zone, and it's great to be here. I would be remiss, let's not forget about our guardians in Space Force. They're also not necessarily represented on this panel,
Yikes.
but I know they've got eyes in the sky and they're looking out for us. So as eloquently opened, yeah, the SBIR Sitter program, it is traditionally a rubber stamp, but currently Senator Ernst back in March introduced what's called the INNOVATE Act, which actually is an acronym, and I won't outline it here because that'll take up the whole time. But what it tries to do is modernize the SBIR Sitter program, which is a great front door for early stage companies and small businesses to get a foothold and figure out how they can be really supportive to not just the DoD, but the whole federal government, right? It is an agency-wide program for all departments. And she's trying to modernize it to really take advantage of how technology is being built in today's day and age. And that is in a lot of parts with venture-backed startups. And so she is trying to bring that private capital leverage to bear, but she's also trying to put some caps and ratios and thinking thoughtfully about companies called multi-award winners, or as what a lot of people colloquially call SBIR mills, companies that routinely win 50 to 100 SBIR or STTR awards in a given year, sometimes totaling 50 million, 100 million plus, without really delivering much commercialization on the back end. And so Senator Ernst, and then joined by Representative Williams, who's the chair of the Small Business Committee on the House, they have now jointly issued INNOVATE Act, which is looking to just modernize the program to be more commercial friendly and bringing in more entrepreneurs trying to solve the vexing problems that are challenging, again, not just the DoD, but all federal government agencies. Zach, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, thanks, David. And thanks, Noah and Ben, for being on the conversation today. Like David, longtime fan, first time caller. So great to be here with you guys, and especially glad to bring in both the perspective on the investing side, but also in terms of just having been an Army officer myself and looking at some of the different products that we have. I think the big opportunity here is that the government is largely recognizing the pivot to scaled production of more novel, but faster and attritable technologies to address some of these problems, which means that we're going to have to whole scale shift the types of platforms and products that our warfighters are leveraging in order to deter and potentially ultimately defeat adversaries. And what we want this program to be is that front door. And that front door has got to be welcome, it's got to be open, and it's got to be collaborative to drive the competition that yields the best types of products. And I think, Noah, you alluded to some of the flack the program has gotten in the past. It has a lower transition rate to program of record if you track all the companies that are awarded through to their full kind of culmination of program of record, somewhere around 30%. And I think there's two important things to say about this. The first is that this program represents around $2 billion annually from the Department of Defense across SBIR and STTRs. If you think about that in terms of last year's FY of around $896 billion, this is a small but critical investment that almost every entrepreneur in this space that wants to get at solving these hard problems on behalf of the warfighter focuses on to initially de-risk. So So it's a small investment to drive that interest and to drive that magnet of entry. The second is that if we think about that transition rate around 30%, it's actually not a terrible thing if we flip the way that we evaluate it, which is to say that we brought a lot of good-hearted entrepreneurs that are thinking about the problem in the right way, and that they didn't achieve the right quality in order to advance up that track record in order to deliver a program of record. And so instead, we've prevented over 60% of poor products, not optimized for performance on the battlefield or in these environments, from reaching that end line. We still got great ideas, we still got great products, and rarely is the first idea the best. We got that collaboration as a result. And so I would point to those two criticisms as really opportunities to reconfigure the way that we think about how much this program punches above its weight and how simple reforms like those identified in the INNOVATE Act can really catalyze this even further, help build a portfolio approach, and drive the type of program that brings in additional entrepreneurs to focus on these problems.
How do you think about success? If this passes and everything works, what are we actually going to see, and how do we measure that to know, okay, this worked or this didn't work in a few years from now?
I think some of the goals of the program is, if you look back over the last decade, the overall defense industry base has been shrinking precipitously. There are just less suppliers. And we know in capitalism that when there's less competition, you get worse outcomes. And so I think some of the goals that we would like to see with these types of reforms is an increase in participation of new businesses, a better transition rate to affecting programs of record, a better return on investment from a commercialization, so that the companies that are participating are not just staying in the bowels of this government grant program, but actually becoming disruptive, important businesses that is going to ensure economic security. And then I would also like to see a leveraging of the private capital as a buoy to the department's own and the federal government's own research and development funding. I think when this program was created back in the 1980s, it wasn't that long ago from there that the federal government and the DoD specifically were the largest capital allocators in R&D. But through the 90s and the 2000s and now today, that has completely flipped on its head. And most of the advanced technology that's occurring and the spend is happening at some of our largest tech firms, and then also being that are ultimately seeded by venture capitalists. So what we're trying to do is recalibrate the system to want to take advantage of these founders and entrepreneurs that want to go out and build disruptive, meaningful businesses that will provide both economic security, but then also spillover effects of national security. And so ultimately grow the industry base in a major way. I'd say one of the big things that derides the Department of Defense is the shrinking of the defense primes. People talk about the Last Supper, right, of the 1990s. So recently, Anduril has been minted, somewhat of a neoprime, I think is a term. And maybe Noah, I might have heard that from you first. But why aren't we getting more of these neoprimes if we've got this great front door that's trying to provide seed capital to these companies? You would think that if you had won hundreds of millions of dollars in government grants, that you must be building technology that can underpin something that can go and compete with these other defense primes. And we just haven't seen the proof in the pudding from the program. And so Anduril did receive a phase 3, but I would be shocked if they still apply to SBIRs. And now they're competing on bigger programs against the companies that we would expect them to, given that their technology prowess is exceptional.
So guys, let's strongman this for a second. What is the strongest argument or two against the reauthorization? Why is this program taking flak now? So what are the strongest arguments against? Zach, you got one? Maybe each of you can share one.
Yeah, I think I hit on it before, which is that the program had been attacked for really its low transition rate. That rate is somewhere in the 30%, depending on the FY that you're looking at it and tracking it through, sometimes lower. And if you're looking at SBIR and STTR as purely an effort to drive companies from initial productization out to scale scale production and then field it across the force, then that rate might be a failure. But I would encourage folks to, again, flip that on its head and begin to think about how many new entrants got the courage through the clarity and the confidence that the SBIR program provide to make that leap into this space, begin to develop products that otherwise they may not have looked at to address defense or intelligence service needs, and then use this as a way to iterate on future products that they may come back for either in different companies or for that same company. And the second, obviously, the benefit of it is it prevents products that, while competitive or may address particular issues enough to get funded, wasn't good enough to really be playing in the major leagues and get drawn through to be fielded across the operational force. And so I think if we consider those counter arguments to this, actually, at the end of the day, it gets us closer to a portfolio approach, a real portfolio across the government as they set out demand signals on what types of solutions they want to see. And it enables them to create the competitive framework for those companies to achieve who might be the best, who is best able to achieve what the mission provider requires, and then ultimately scale the right solution for the right time and place.
Yeah, great arguments. David, let me modify the question for you. I know you're ready to launch here, but for venture-backed founders, of which Ben is one, right? I think you're hearing, or we've heard for years in the ecosystem when folks talk to venture investors, or at least it went from being, oh, cool, you have a SBIR, awesome, let's write that into the revenue calculations as we value the company, to, hey, we basically value SBIR at $0 in the sense that's not recurring revenue, that's not real revenue, that's grant funding. It's useful from an acquisition vehicle, but it's not useful as revenue. So why, from a venture standpoint, is this important to you?
I think it's the inherent flexibility of the program. The fact that you can see technology happening in the year of execution, and then you in the DoD as a program manager or an operator can support a company through an open topic or maybe craft a specific topic and get them to work and go test and trial the technology at an exercise or maybe in an operational environment, and help use that to help inform your requirements. And now I know, right, the JSIDS program is like going through a whole revamp, and we don't call it JSIDS anymore. It's got some other weird acronym, and let's not get into that. But the point of the SBIR program, unlike the propensity of all other funding in the department, is that it doesn't necessarily get trapped by the 2-year POM cycle, right? Where typically the DoD has to look into a crystal ball and know what it wants to buy in 2 years, right? As it goes through this very bureaucratic process that ideally culminates in an appropriations bill that allows them to go do the thing that they want to. And so again, the flexibility for the year in execution that the SBIR funding provides, I think is really important for the warfighter to understand the art of the possible and what technology trends are occurring in real time. And again, provide entrepreneurs a pathway to engaging to figure out product market fit with user groups that are highly motivated and thus using the SBIR program. Now, I do want to do one of the defenders of the SBIR program too, right? They will say that the DoD has very niche needs and that not all of the innovations that come out of the program are going to end up having great commercial market success and transition into big, beautiful businesses. I would argue, like, how impressed are we with the delivery of capabilities inside the DoD today? And how much of the DoD's technology needs are truly DoD niche specific, or is it commercial best practices that need to be adopted for military application? And I would say that it is really more on like this idea of dual use. And I'm not saying that it has to be able to be sold into the DoD and then sold into healthcare and fintech, but rather it's like the same concepts that would build a successful commercial business should also now be applied to the DoD, and not cost plus contracting and thinking through that every like specification needs to be military hardened and unique. And we just need to break down these barriers to entry, these walled gardens, and figure out a way to like leverage commercial best practices that pretty much expand to 95% of the DoD's needs today. And then the final one is, GAO did a report on this, and I'm no huge fan of GAO, but they did highlight a pretty comprehensive report showcasing that The SBIR program returns 89 cents for every SBIR phase two dollar invested. And maybe that's good compared to other federal R&D programs. But I don't know, Zach, if you returned 89 cents on the dollar to your limited partners, how long do you think your fund would be around for?
I think this gets at the heart of this dynamic of changing the perspective of government from picking winners into driving this portfolio approach to field the best possible outcomes. And I think right now there is and rightfully right, government shouldn't be in the business of failure. That's not what we're talking about. But in order to achieve moonshots, you have to be able to iterate aggressively and at the speed of need. And right now we're operating at the speed of bureaucracy and at its whims. And that's really not a way to drive scalability, to drive speed, to drive competition, and ultimately to win. I think anytime you're pointing towards the rule book that's years old, that's not to say to disregard the rules, but it's an opportunity to rethink and reimagine what the art of possible for today to give the confidence for entrepreneurs to come into this space. And I think the other thing that I would say is that really at the end of the day, when we're talking about this, we're talking around what's the single point of truth, what's the single point of entry, how does the department more clearly communicate its specific need? And I think, Noah, this started with a question around how do VCs evaluate these SBIRs? I don't think we would say that we completely dismiss them out of hand. I think they're a critically important vehicle to show that you have real traction, that this isn't just a back of a napkin idea, but that you've done the homework to think about what I think are the four pillars of any market: the problems that the people and the processes face and the products that are going to go out there to solve them. And if you can show that you've got a SBIR, it means that like you've gotten about 3/4 of the way in getting the people to understand how your product solves their problem. And you have an idea of the way the process works. So for me, that's a really attractive founder that knows what they have to go do, and they have a roadmap that they can prosecute around an idea that they're pulling into the world. So yes, it might be disappointing to hear on the valuation side. I completely hear that, but it's a hugely important signal to be able to communicate that you have the confidence of a customer or potential customer that your solution could be something that scales into the solution that they need. So I think that's just an important point to add on.
How do we think something you said that touched on like risk reward portfolio? I'm thinking back to my investment classes. So like security market line, minimum variance portfolios. Like how does the DoD have that approach? And even do that with the current way we do planning and POM and programs of record. Doesn't that imply when I'm building a portfolio for my stocks, I'm assuming some failures? Does the DoD have to change their mindset around failures to have this be success and failure being a good thing in some ways?
I think the DoD needs to be willing to learn quickly, right? And then move on. I think the worst thing that we see is these programs that go on for years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And then we finally declare it a failure only because Congress gets involved and says no more money going to this thing that hasn't delivered and for such a long time. And I think one of the best examples of that was the Air Operations Center 10.2 that kind of gave way to what Kessel Run became. It was just way bloated, way delayed, way over budget. We need to be just more nimble, and failure isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's how you fail. And we ought to be figuring out ways to leverage the SBIR program to understand how do operators interact with these technology trends? Are they ready for prime time, ready to be scaled, or not today? And we'll wait for the next technological evolution. But the moment that the commercial sector launches LLMs into the world, is it the SBIR program that ought to be a really easy pathway for the DoD to start experimenting with these types of technologies and then figuring out what does the right program look like to scale and adopt it at large, because these trends are happening faster and faster today.
I think David is so right here. So one of the things that I would say is that it's not so important to think about failure as it is to think about standards and to shift our thinking from one of requirements, which ultimately become essentially a schematic, to capabilities. And what are the capabilities that our commanders need down at the local level, whether they be geographic or functional commands, in order to execute their joint or inter operations? I think to David's point around calling failure after years of funding and only when Congress gets involved on the oversight or appropriation side, Look at the Booker tank that was canceled in July. This is a perfect example of where the Army could have taken a laddered, metrics-driven approach in order to fund those who could perform at differing levels of expectation to drive towards scale production and ultimately the yielding of the best capability to deliver the needed item on the battlefield. By the way, this is not something new to the US government. I think what kind of confounds me in this space is that the US government, when it needs to be, is capable of extraordinary innovation in contracting and production. Look at Operation Warp Speed. Look at the COTS program in NASA that built the launch economy. They spent, this is one of my favorite anecdotes in US government procurement, which sounds like bad bedtime reading, but I swear is actually a good story here, which is the NASA COTS program, Commercial Orbital Transport System Competition, was focused on finding the best launch capability at the cheapest price, but it had to maximize certain metrics in order to deliver both human and equipment loads into space. The program is funded for around $500 million through, I think, 4 different phases. They ended up spending about 396, and each time one of the competing primes had to deliver at a certain metric in order to drive the outcome. Obviously, that program gave rise to SpaceX and to Blue Origin. That $500 million investment, of which they only spent around 80%, just shy of 80% actually, has yielded what is expected to be a $41 billion space launch economy by 2030. So the reality is the US government can do this. The question is, how do we inform the process in a way that's bipartisan, that's effective, and that gets our most critical need? And this is why, like, small steps, pragmatically minded reforms like the INNOVATE Act are an important first step. So I think taking it all back to like SBIRs, start small, aim small, miss small. This is the opportunity to drive that outcome.
I love this. I'm going to, gentlemen, this has been hugely insightful. We got to let you go. I think, Zach, where you just ended, though, it's that enthusiastic skepticism. It's, hey, we can do this. We should always, it's a little trust but verify. We should always put the controls in place, put the oversight in place, hold the program to a higher standard. Don't be prisoner to low expectations. The government can do big things, and they can do them well when we make the tools available and we hold ourselves to account. INNOVATE Act, SBIR, we'll see what happens. We'll continue following this story here on the Steam Zone. And David and Zach, I'm sure you guys will continue your advocacy. Thanks for making some time to join us.
Thanks, Noah.
Appreciate the opportunity.